Well, we're going to jump right in today. Last week, we left Jacob returning home with his new big family after having met God twice in the wilderness and dealing with his manipulative counterpart, Uncle Laban. And we finished with the challenge to worry less about what others are thinking of us and where we line up, and to instead ask God, how are we doing? Are we good? Because if we get that straight, that we're right with him, then we won't be so needy and desperate for the blessings we're trying to get from everywhere and everyone else. And we decided that when women are actually doing that, you don't feel them striving for a name they want others to call them, like so smart, or she's just so caring, or she's so physically fit, or fashionable, or clever, or she's just the most creative person ever, so she's so beautiful, or such a great mom or wife or employer or friend, and on and on. They're more concerned with what God calls them. So I challenged you to do some wrestling with God in that area and ask him what he calls you over what you want others to call you. And I hope you had some time this week to spend alone with him. Now, because I lived in Colorado for so many years, I used to travel a lot through the Denver airport. The Denver airport's super fun. It has this train system. It's like a monorail. It goes underground and above ground. It has this really cute little chime that rings. It's like doo-doo-doo-doo whenever you get to your destination. Anyway, it's fun to travel the train. And one time I was traveling from up in the mountains through Denver on my way to California, and I had a really, really late connection on that part of the trip. So I was hurrying. I got on the train, and I was supposed to go from Terminal A to Terminal B, and I heard the little chime go off, and I got out. I got to my gate, and it was like empty. So I'm looking around thinking, uh-oh, what's happened here? And then I look at the sign. I remember it was gate 42, and it said Salt Lake City, which was so not where I was going. So I went up to the desk, and I showed the lady my ticket, and she looks at me, and she was very respectful, but she said, you're in Terminal C. Yeah, it's supposed to be B. So a little bit embarrassing. And then if you ever been this person in the airport where you're like, you don't want to full on run because then people think there's an emergency, but you're going really, really fast and you're dragging your luggage as fast as you can. So I go back down to the train, get on, hear the little chime, ding-a-ling-a-ling, get off, run to my gate, and they've pushed back and they're gone. So now I go to the desk and I'm late. They have to find me a new route, new connection, a detour. I've got to go all the way through Phoenix, which doesn't make any sense at all, to finally get to my final destination. So when I say the words, and I'm back in your notes, detours, or missed connections, or route changes, or bad weather, or missed trains, or wrong trains, does your back get tight? Mine does every time. But we said at the beginning of our Unexpected series that life typically takes us on those detours rather than down a straight line to our destination. So it's rarely from A to B and then a straight shot back to Z. It's more likely to go to A, to R, to Y, and then maybe even back to B again. But the thing is, most of us didn't sign up for the detour part, whether those detours are of our own doing or not. And I don't know about you, but as soon as I see a detour sign on the road, it's like I let out this, moan sound. And yet it would be ridiculous to just sit there staring at the sign and stubbornly refuse to move. Then we just go nowhere. So something has to happen for us to move forward. Now, the Bible is full of stories of people who had great destinies, but had to travel through more than a few detours to get there. And Jacob, who we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks, had a son named Joseph, who's a great picture of what that looks like. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to learn from his remarkable story in the book of Genesis and how his unexpected detours can help us navigate ours. So we're going to pick it up in Genesis 37. Here we go. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan. Remember, he returned home where his father had lived as a foreigner. And this is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph, Jacob's son, was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, which is so unfortunate in every way, shape, and form, Bilhah and Zilpah. Can you imagine that? Why did they name their people with these names? So unfortunate. But Joseph reported to his father, underline this, some of the bad things his brothers were doing. And Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So when we first meet Joseph, he's a 17-year-old teenager. And remember how we said Jacob had a lot of children? Well, Joseph comes in at number 11. And unfortunately, Jacob played favorites like his own parents did. Remember that? And he picked Joseph as his favorite son. So we already have some generational dysfunction going on here. And honestly, their family is kind of like the Bible's version of the Kardashians. I can't even imagine what holidays would have been like around there. And we get our first picture of how Joseph relates to his siblings in verse 2, where it says what? He tattled on them. He's a tattletale. And it gets better. Verse 3. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't even think of a kind word to say to him. So there's no way this is going to go well. This is the famous coat of many colors given to Jacob's favorite. And it presented an even bigger problem because remember, it was the firstborn that was supposed to get the robe along with all those other firstborn blessings and birthrights we talked about a couple weeks ago. And since Joseph was number 11, it's pretty much downhill from there. Verse 5. One night, Joseph had a dream. And when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain, and suddenly my bundles stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. Wow, his brothers responded. So you think you'll be our king, do you? Do you actually think you'll reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. Listen, he said, I've had another dream, he said. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers, but his father scolded him. What kind of dream is that? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered, what in the world do these dreams mean? So Joseph's brothers were already jealous because of the coat situation, and they basically couldn't stand him. And now he drops this big dream on them where in the future, they're going to actually bow down to him. And then he has a second dream where the whole universe bows down too. So, this kid, he needed to stay up more or something because this is not going well. Because he's made several critical mistakes. He's tattled. He's told his dreams to the wrong people. He can't keep his mouth shut, and his timing is absolutely horrible. Now, Joseph actually had the gift of interpreting dreams, which will serve him greatly later. But he's really, really short on wisdom. Wisdom, and you can underline that, it's the ability to know when and what to share with whom. And God had some work to do with him before he could finally step into some of the things he was dreaming about. He definitely needed a few detours to mature him for what was ahead. And on top of that, he's prancing around in his fancy tunic everywhere, showing off. Verse 12. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. When they'd been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready, and I'll send you to them. I'm ready to go, Joseph replied. Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along, Jacob said. Then come back and give me a report. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him at a distance, probably because he had his fancy coat on. And as he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. Some of your translations will say into this pit. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern or pit here in the wilderness, and then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. Now, Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. But when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and they threw him into the cistern. Now, the cistern was empty because there was no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. And it was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of, these are cool products, gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. So the brothers obviously haven't gotten over their resentment, and they stripped Joseph of his precious coat that he's been hiding behind. And detours sometimes have a way of doing that, don't they? Of stripping off the things that are holding us back, and then they throw him in the pit. Now, a pit is a hole you can't get out of by yourself. And even though Joseph didn't create or make the pit, that's where he ended up. And it says there's no food or water in there, which can be true of detours as well. They can be both dry and alone in a multitude of ways. Verse 26. Judah said to his brothers, well, what would we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother. He's our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the pit, sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him where? Egypt, underline that. So sometime later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. And when he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. And he went back to his brothers and lamented, the boy is gone. What do we do now? Then the brothers got an idea. They killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. And they sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message. Look what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son? Interesting wording. And their father recognized it immediately. Yes, he said, it's my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap, and he mourned deeply for his son for a long time. And his family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. I'll go to my grave mourning for my son, he would say, and then he would weep. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, underline this, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now, Potiphar was captain of the palace guard. So Joseph is sold to slave traders who brought him to Egypt. And his situation seems to have gone really from bad to worse. But I want you to see that God has not abandoned him. First of all, his brothers Reuben and Judah kept the rest of the brothers from killing him. And then note that when Joseph got to Egypt, he wasn't just sold to anyone. It just so happened that he was sold to Potiphar, the captain of the palace guard. Again, like we said last week, there's no place and no one that are beyond his reach. The thing is, God is already at work with Joseph and the plans that he has for him. And he allows him to be put in a pit, sold as a slave, and brought to Egypt for something bigger than what we can see right now, for a higher purpose and a greater story. But in order to get there, he had to take this little detour to grow his character. Why? Underline this. Because it's the detours that reveal what's really inside of us and challenge us to grow. And Joseph begins to do just that. Chapter 39. When Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And underline this, the Lord was what? With Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was what? With Joseph, underline it, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. And from the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. So sounds like first world problems to me. But I love how verse 2 reminds us again that the Lord was what? With Joseph, both in the pit and out of the pit, and now as a slave, because underline it, if you're on a detour and you know God is with you, it makes whatever happens along the way purposeful beyond the circumstance itself, yeah? So as Joseph continues to grow in character, he's rewarded by Potiphar. And as a slave, God allows him to learn how to develop both his capacity and his skills so that later he can assume an even greater responsibility and position. Joseph didn't have all the details of where God was taking him, but his aim for excellence gave him the opportunity to learn the skills he would need later as a ruler. And this is such a good reminder, underline it, for us to always look for the hand of God, even when it's coming through the hand of man. And it's also a reminder that as a Christian, God calls us to be employees who stand out because of our commitment to excellence and productivity and hard work, that we're trustworthy because of our loyalty and our integrity. But now, Satan comes in and throws another curveball for Joseph, and this time it's in the form of temptation. Here we go, chapter 39. Joseph was very handsome and well built as a young man, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. "Come sleep with me," she demanded. Now, since this was Potiphar's wife, she's probably very, very attractive, and so I'm guessing this offer was tempting for him. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He's held back nothing from me except you because, hello, you're his wife. So how could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." But she kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. Good plan. One day, however, no one else was around when he went in to do his work. And this woman, she's direct and she's relentless, and she came and she grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, "Now come on and sleep with me." And Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. And when she saw that she was holding his cloak and he'd fled, she called out to her servants, and soon all the men came running. And "Look," she said, "my husband's brought this Hebrew slave here to make fools of us. And he came into my room to rape me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream, I ran outside and got away, but he left his cloak behind with me." And she kept the cloak with her until her husband came home. And then she told him her story. "That Hebrew slave you brought into our house tried to come in and fool around with me," she said, "but when I screamed, he ran outside, leaving his cloak with me." Well, Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph, threw him into prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. So this is awesome. Now he's fired. His reputation is ruined. He's in a foreign country, not only as a slave, but now he's a prisoner. And have you ever had someone lie about you, or twist something you said where there's really no way to set the record straight? It's so painful. But even though Joseph's detour blameless is growing rapidly, you do not hear him going there. Not with his dad, not with his brothers, or even with Mrs. Potiphar. And I love what happens next in the story, because God continues to show Joseph his presence. So he doesn't keep him from these particular detours, but he continues to join him in them. And if you're walking with God and you're on a detour right now, it's important to remember that God's seated in the car with you on the road. He's right there. He just doesn't just leave us alone to try and navigate all this on our own. Look what it says in verse 21. "But the Lord was again," what? "With Joseph," underline it, "in the prison, and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything else that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was" what? Underline it. "With him and caused everything he did to succeed." So now Joseph gets a promotion in jail, of all places. And God continues to show him his presence in the middle of a situation, underline it, that he isn't ready to take him out of just yet. And in Psalm 105:19, we get a glimpse into what all this is about. It says this: "Until the time," you say it with me, "until the time," say it again, "until the time came to fulfill his dreams, the Lord tested Joseph's character." And that may have made you mad. You may be thinking, "Well, I don't need to be part of that setup. Until what time? What time is that?" And to be tested, no one likes the test word. But the word tested here, we've talked about it before, it doesn't mean to take a test. It means to refine, like a goldsmith refining gold. And through all these detours, that is what God is doing. And Joseph was allowing him to accomplish that in him by not wasting the pain or the process or its power, underline it, to transform him. But he could do that because he knew God was with him in the pit. And he knew he was with him in the sale to the slave traders and when he was sold to the general of Pharaoh's army. And he knew he was with him when Potiphar's wife tempted him. And now he knows he's with him in jail. And this is critical because I want you to star this. Sometimes I think we view God's presence based on his removal of the detour rather than his presence on the detour with us. And I love how Joseph didn't let the circumstances affect his relationship with God either. He didn't pull away. Instead, he pulled near. So we're beginning to see how, underline it, training for the greater things God has for us always takes place in the lesser things. So we need to be both responsible and content with today for him to be able to take us to what he has for us tomorrow. And it reminds me of this verse we've looked at before in 1 Timothy 6:6, which says, godliness, it's a means of great gain. It's a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. You see, the secret sauce in all this is the contentment piece. Yes, God was growing Joseph's character in all this. Yes, he was preparing him to step into the dreams that he'd written on his heart. But it was the contentment, underline it, on the detours to getting there that made room for God to make him successful. And you don't see him blaming here either. I think one of the greatest obstacles to both our personal growth and growth in our faith is that when something goes wrong, we're so quick to focus on who we going to blame for the detour. We're so defensive. So we try and find and focus on that thing or that person so we don't have to look inside, to look in here. And one of the greatest or toughest challenges to our contentment and our trust in his presence is when we've suffered, when we've actually done nothing wrong. It tests both our character and our resolve to the max. So now let's fast forward 20 years from Joseph's brothers throwing him in the pit, because here comes another very interesting plot twist. Because while Joseph is in prison, it's no coinkydink that Pharaoh's baker and his butler get thrown in there too. It's so reminiscent of Beauty and the Beast, the baker, the butler, all these guys. Anyway, chapter 40. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended to them, and he continued for some time in custody. And I love how God gives you people to minister to on your own detour. Don't miss that. And one night, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had dreams, and each dream had its own interpretation. And when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw they were troubled. So he asked them, well, why are your faces so sad today? And they said to him, well, we've had these dreams, and there's no one to interpret them. Don't you wish you had someone to interpret your dreams? And Joseph said to them, well, don't interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. And I love how Joseph cared about these two men who God was going to use later to fulfill his own dream. And often that's the case, isn't it? When we're on a detour, it's never just about us. It's about the people we encounter on the detour too. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, in my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only, could you do this for me? Remember me when it's going so well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh to get me out of here. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here I've done nothing that should put me into this prison. In other words, could you help a brother out? Verse 16. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable for the butler, for the cupbearer, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. So not so great an outcome for the baker. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's happy birthday, he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. But I'm feeling hopeful for Joseph here. I'm feeling hopeful here. Underline it, but. Verse 23. The chief cupbearer didn't remember Joseph. He forgot him. Bummer. It's so disappointing. The cupbearer doesn't even put in a good word for Joseph. He didn't get the hookup. But hold on, because remember, God will use whoever he chooses to make a way for us when it's what? his best timing. Chapter 41. After how long? How many? 2 whole years of basically sitting on the tarmac now. Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile, watch this, 7 cows, attractive and plump, which are terms I don't think I've ever used to describe cows before. And they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood beside the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. So disgusting. And Pharaoh awoke for good reason, and he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke again, and behold, it was a dream. What one would hope so. So in the morning, his spirit was troubled, right? Because now he's seen skinny cows eating attractive cows and little corns eating big corns. Now, I actually have weird dreams like that sometimes, don't you? But he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told his dreams, yet none of them could interpret it to Pharaoh. It's interesting how when God is setting something up, he doesn't even let smart people come up with the answers and get in the way. Then the chief cupbearer, it's like he gets the big aha now, and he says to Pharaoh, you know what? I remember a little something here. I remember my offenses today. And when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, each of us having a dream with its own interpretation. And a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. And when we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged and lost his head. In other words, hey, would you like to meet this guy, Pharaoh? Well, yeah, of course he did. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly went and brought him out of the jail. And because he'd been there so long, he shaved himself and changed his clothes, and he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there's no one who can interpret it. And I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So I want us to stop here and think about how differently Joseph deals with Pharaoh in comparison to how he dealt with his brothers in the past. Joseph, he's maturing. In the past, he thought he had success because of a special coat that he didn't even ask for in the first place. But now he gives God the glory. And it's such a great reminder that success is not what you have or you haven't been given. It's what you do with it and how that can make all the difference. You see, success is trusting the one who doesn't need more than a minute to change the entire course of your life, and then being faithful to what he's given you to accomplish now so you can step into the even greater things he has for you down the road. Even when it means staying on the course of the detours either he or life bring along the way. And I know this has happened to some of you. It's happened to me multiple times where, you got up one day, something happened, and everything changes the next morning. Everything's different. Verse 17. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I've never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But when they'd eaten them, how disgusting it is. No one would have known they'd eaten them, for they're still as ugly as at the beginning. So freaky. And then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good, 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears, and I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years, but the dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty years blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow. It will be very severe. A lot of famine going on, bad famine. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that it's fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. In other words, God validated his will by showing it to him twice. By the way, this is why this is why he flipped that fleece over, if you remember Gideon's story on both sides. God typically confirms things in twos. You see that all over the Old Testament. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all of these food of the good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. The food will be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that shall occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Hello? Joseph doesn't even have to say, pick me. Because then Pharaoh said to Joseph, well, since God's shown you all this, there's none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I've set you over all the land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand. He put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen instead of that ridiculous robe, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot. And they called up before him, bow the knee, and they set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one will lift up hand or foot in all of the land of Egypt. Pretty powerful. Joseph was how old? He's young, you guys. He was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. And he gathered up all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt. And he put food in the cities. He put in every city the food from the fields around it. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. A lot of grain going down. Before the year of the famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On, born them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the land, and in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. What he says, you do. So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine, it must have been so severe, they've said it about 100 times. So now this is a tad unexpected. It's been 22 years since Joseph's dream. Not 22 minutes, not 22 days or 22 weeks. It's a long, stinking time. But lots of things had to come into alignment, including Joseph himself. And in my experience, you can underline it, one of the key ingredients for success, it has to be humility. And often that is learned over time, because waiting is humbling, isn't it? Because waiting says, I might not be in control. And leaders often struggle with this trait. So like Abraham, we're tempted to go out and find ourselves a Hagar to try and get things taken care of ahead of God's timing or power or provision. But when we do that, we actually underline it. We add our own detour into the mix. This is why I love what it says in Proverbs 19:21. Star it, highlight it. What's the first word? Many are the plans in the mind of a man. It's scary sometimes how many plans are going on inside of my mind. But it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Now, does that mean we don't plan or we just don't move at all? No. Because along with humility, I believe the other secret ingredient is obedience. So we move by obeying whatever God puts in front of us in the next 5 minutes when we're tempted to gossip about someone, or later tonight when we choose to be patient with our mom or our child. And I get it. I get it. We want a predictable God who takes us on a predictable route of our own choosing. But the fact is, life is unpredictable. People are unpredictable. But what we can know is that He's always moving us towards something greater on the other side of those detours. And His love and His presence will remain with us as we travel with Him along the way. So God never really tells you everything about where He's taking you all at once. He doesn't just open up the last page of the story and say, okay, Tanya, now here's your destiny and here's how you're going to get there. But He has told each and every one of us, He's told us something. So whatever that is, no matter how small it may seem, you can start with that. And the question I have for you and me today is, what is God telling you to do right now? What's He telling me to do? What's He whispering in your ear? Do that. Even if you don't know why, because that's what's going to determine your tomorrow and the next day and your next day. And if you don't know where to start, you can always go to the Bible. There's more than enough stuff to do in there. You could start with the 2 commandments in Luke 10:27. Love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That'll give us plenty to do. Several years ago, you guys, I had a great husband. I had 3 beautiful children. And I remember I can see myself, I can hear myself doing this. When I would put my kids to bed, sometimes they'd talk to me about things they were afraid of or friends they were worried about. And they'd worry about their friends whose parents were going to get a divorce, who had gotten a divorce. And I would say to them, you know what? I want you to take that off your plate. You don't ever have to worry about that. I don't want you to ever worry about, your dad and I, we love each other. We're never going to get a divorce. Don't worry about that. I never even considered, honestly, it never hit my radar that could happen to me. I just never even thought about it until I got up one morning and everything changed. I was so shocked to be on that detour, y'all. I can tell you this, that it broke me. You wouldn't have recognized me, I don't think, in that first year. If you'd have seen me on the street, you might have looked twice and said, well, maybe that was Tanya. I was so broken, and it broke my kids too. And in the beginning, I fought hard to be strong and resilient and even happy face, happy thoughts, happy through all that. I did not embrace the brokenness at all. But when I finally did, you guys, God was able to grow me on that detour and give me hope for even greater, more beautiful things that today, still to this day, they take my breath away for what He did for that. But I had to let down my pride and embrace the brokenness to see how God was preparing me for something more. I'm in your notes. We spend so much energy trying to avoid the brokenness and unknowns on the detour instead of, I'm sorry about this word, but embracing them and growing from what we discover along the way. And then you know what happens? We end up more exhausted because they're inevitably going to show up anyway. And then we're too tired to let them do their work of stripping away our pride and our self-sufficiency and prepare us for the greater thing that God has around the bend. So I wonder what would happen if we didn't expend all our energy desperately trying to find a way back to the main road and focused on what's right there in front of us today. I think a lot would happen. I want us to do that. I want that for you. I want that for me on whatever detour you're on this week. We're all on some version of this. And you know how it goes. Sometimes they're great ones like the one I just told you about. Sometimes they're the little one, but they're all important. God wants to do something in all of them. Now, next week, we're going to have a really short lesson because we're going to be packing for Lunches of Love. But wait till you see what happens when all the brothers and all their detours collide with Joseph's. It's quite an amazing story. Would you pray with me? Lord, I'm just picturing all different roads in here today, all these paths, all of them everywhere, all roads. Some of us are on the main drag right now. That's awesome. Some of us are on the beaten path. We're kind of off-road. And I pray we'd be really self-aware this week of being so desperate to get back on the main road, but really embrace what you have for us on the detour. Show us your face. Let us hear your voice. Show us our next step in the next few minutes, today, tonight, tomorrow, this week, next week. And I thank you that you have beautiful things for every single woman here ahead, and that you have beautiful things along the way. We don't want to miss them. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, lots of fun things to talk about.